Hi, it's Doug here. Today I'm at Bald Hill. I thought I'd just come up and have a bit of a throw and have a practice for the Mando Madness that's on this weekend, but the course is actually looking a little busy, so I thought maybe we'll just have a little chat. I thought I might just do a little disc golf video for people who are just getting into the sport and maybe just share a few things I've learnt. I've been playing for nearly 6 years now. I've watched a lot, I've sort of learnt a lot, I've thrown a lot, I kind of know what works and what doesn't for me, so I'm just thinking if you're just getting into the sport, maybe this could be of some use to you. So this is just going to be 10 off the cuff ad hoc tips that I wish I'd known 6 years ago and maybe will make you a better disc golfer, so please enjoy. Okay, my first tip would be to get to know your discs really, really well. Disc golf is a lot more fun if you know what your discs are going to do. So let's just say you're starting out and you might have 3, 5, 7 discs. Just stick with 3, 5 or 7 discs. Don't get any more discs. You'll see players who have been playing for years who are carrying 30 discs around. Don't do that. Don't do that when you're starting out. Just throw a few discs and throw the heck out of them. Learn what they do. Throw them backhand, throw them forehand, throw them uphill, throw them downhill. Throw them into the wind, throw them downwind, throw them sort of an anhyzer, which is sort of an angle of release, throw them flat, throw them on a hyzer. Mix up all those combinations, throw them downhill anhyzer into a crosswind. Don't be surprised by a throw when you're playing around in competition. Know what your discs do. Love your discs, care for your discs. Make your discs an extension of your soul. The more you throw your discs and don't swap them in and out of your bag, the better player you'll become. Love your discs. My next tip is a little weird, but become a great general. Become Alexander the Great. Become Napoleon. Become Robert E. Lee. What do I mean by this? They all had great eyes for terrain and the ground. When you're playing disc golf, understand what ground you're throwing over, what ground you're landing on. Is it sloping uphill, downhill? Is it grassy? Is it dry? Is it skippy? How is your disc, which you know from the first tip, going to react when it hits a particular type of ground? Will it skip? Will it stick? Will it tomahawk? Will it tombstone? Just become a Civil War general, become a great general of history, and know the effects of ground on your discs. That especially applies for upshots. That was a great upshot. So you've got to know how your disc reacts when it hits the ground. Become obsessed by landing angles of your discs. You'll become a better disc golfer, you'll get closer to the basket, and your scores will come down. Become a great general, know how the ground works for your game. Okay, my next tip is about throwing the disc. Although my tip is, don't say throwing the disc. I don't think you throw the disc. Throwing the disc implies you physically are arming the disc, but you're really not doing that. What you're really doing, I think, is slinging the disc. This was a bit of a light bulb moment for me about 18 months ago, where I stopped trying to throw the disc and I started trying to sling the disc. And I think I sort of worked that out by looking at a GIF of Paige Pierce basically throwing the disc, where she literally wasn't throwing the disc. I fell for it just then. She was literally just stopping and whipping her body around, and her arm just trailed behind her like a catapult, like a trebuchet, one of these ancient catapults from Lord of the Rings or something like that. So what you're trying to do is, you're not trying to arm the disc out there. Everybody who starts will be arming the disc. What you're trying to do is you're trying to just whip your arm around. So no tension from here down to here. The only tension is in your fingers gripping the disc, and even that should be quite light. So whip the disc, don't throw the disc. So for my next tip, here's a typical scenario where I find myself in, where I've thrown on hole 2 at Bald Hill and I've landed right here. I've got like a little awkward gap to get through to try and salvage a par or possibly pinch a birdie. So my tip here is find the most air. So how do I get to the basket to make sure I get a par? I could go through that gap over there, that's pretty high risk. I could go through this gap here, that's high risk. I could go through this gap as well, that's high risk. What am I going to do? What I think I'm going to do is I'm going to look up. Never be afraid to look up. There's the biggest gap right there. So I think when I find myself in this position, trying to get to that basket, I look for the most air, and at the moment the most air is up there. I'm going through there, minimize the risk, try and get to the basket and take a par. My next tip, especially as a beginning player, is really start working early on your upshots and your putting. We'll get to putting, but just upshots. Upshots is where you're going to save the most strokes early on as you learn to throw and get your distance up. So I tend to have 3 discs that I use pretty much exclusively for my upshots. I have a MVP spin, which is an understable approach disc. I like to use this for uphill upshots or upshots that have to basically turn from left to right. I have a Berg, everybody has a Berg. Basically it's a 1-speed disc, it's very point and shoot. So that's another rule, throw the slowest disc that will do the job. A 1-speed, if you can throw a 1-speed, throw a 1-speed, you'll minimize the errors. And I also have an overstable approach disc. This is a Westside Anvil, very overstable, and I use this for shots that really have to bend or shape. So yeah. And typically when I'm out playing a practice round, I'll just throw all 3 of these discs and just practice all 3 with the same upshot. So I'm here now, I'm just going to throw all 3 discs. I'm trying to get to that basket down there. Let's see how we go. Should be able to make all 3 of those putts, and I'm getting 3 reps during my practice to dial my upshots in. So that's my tip. Be really good at upshots. Work on them all the time. My next tip is more, I guess it's on the mental side of disc golf, the mental game. And if I was going to boil it down, I would say practice as if it matters, play as if it doesn't matter. Now what I mean by this is, do all your criticisms and all your deep dives and analysis, do that while you're practicing, when you're doing your field work or playing a practice round. Do all the criticism of yourself during the practice. If it's not going well, okay, have a little whinge to yourself, but try and work out why it's not going well. Don't be afraid to triage your disc golf game. Do all that when it doesn't matter. When you play an actual round, whether it be a social day or a tournament or some sort of competition, I like to jokingly call these rounds of consequence. Don't let those consequences affect your game. Try and go out and play as a free spirit when the round matters. Try and take all the consequences of a round out of the equation. Just go out and play when you're playing a round. Do all the deep dive stuff. Do that while you're practicing. I find that helps me a lot. If I go out and play a round that matters and I don't care about the result, I'm not chasing a score, I'm not, I didn't birdie that hole that I should have birdied. I don't worry about that stuff, and that has helped me a lot. I find the birdies come more freely when I don't really care. So I do all my care during my practice, and when I play, I just play. I just enjoy it. I just hang out with my mates. I like to chat. I like to just have fun. Yeah. Take all the heavy lifting out of the rounds that actually matter and just go out and enjoy them. Okay, my next tip is a bit of a weird one again. Most of them are weird, really. My next tip is putt with fish. Now, what do I mean by that? I'm not suggesting we all go out and buy a can of tuna and stick it in our disc golf bag. What I suggest you all do, if you're worried at all about putting, is look up Andrew Fish. He's a professional disc golfer from, I think, the northeast of the United States. He's very intelligent, he's very eloquent, and he puts out a lot of good stuff. He even has a great podcast that I subscribe to called the Fish Golf Bracast. But what he did several years ago now was he put out like a 10 to 15 point putting, I don't know, thesis almost on Twitter, or whatever's left of Twitter now. And I think you can still find this on Reddit. And even if you can't, I scraped it off Twitter and I've kept it in my notes on my phone, and I try and read this 15 point sort of dot point mantra on putting once a month. It is absolutely fantastic. So if you're worried at all about putting and how to fix putting or what to do about putting, I suggest you look up Andrew Fish putting, and you'll probably find it on Reddit. And even if you can't, I'm going to try and do some little editing magic and just scroll all the dot points past this little piece here. But the main gist is minimize the movements in putting, take out all extraneous movements that don't contribute to a putt. Don't worry about putting. Don't let the consequences of a putt enter your head. If you've got any doubt that you're going to make a putt, you're probably going to miss the putt, so you've got to believe in the putt. And it's just brilliant. I try and read it once a month. It's helped my putting a lot. I'm not a great putter. I even have the old first hole fear where I pretty much always miss the first putt of a round, and it's always low left because it's purely just fear of failure. I try not to worry about it. The first hole, I always seem to do it. So yeah, Andrew Fish, putting. If you're worried about it, go read it. It's fantastic. Putt with a fish. My next little tip is more aimed at the beginners who may be a little confused by discs and what discs to throw and those weird numbers that are actually on the discs, the 7, 5, minus 1, 1 or whatever. The first number is the speed of a disc, and that's a pretty arcane term, because what does speed 7 mean? What does speed 14 mean? What does speed 1 mean? Well, if you ask a disc golfer what that means, it's basically how fast you have to throw that disc in order for the rest of the numbers on that disc to make sense. And even that's a bit weird, because everybody throws a disc differently. We all have our different angles of release, we all have our different arm speeds, we all have our different rates of spin, all sorts of things, wind, all sorts of things. So I get a little leery of all these disc reviews because everybody throws a disc differently. So if you're beginning and you don't really know what these numbers mean, I suggest you borrow a disc that's fairly neutral, which means the last two numbers on a disc add up to 0. So maybe something like an Axiom Crave or a Discraft Buzz. I would borrow one. I would go and throw it maybe 10 times in a field. Measure each throw. So maybe you're throwing each one sort of 55 meters. Add all those meters up, you get 550. Divide by 10, you get 5.5. And that's the speed of your arm. It's the rule of 10. Nobody really talks about it. I found it on the internet years ago. But that's a way to measure your arm speed. Go and throw a disc 10 times. Take an average of how far you threw it, and that's the speed of the disc you should be starting out with. And when you can throw further, you can start to go up a bit in the disc speed. So if you're confused about what discs to throw, measure how far you can throw, divide it by 10, and that should be your starting speed for a disc. It's a very loose rule, but I found it quite useful for new players getting into the game. My next and probably final tip is, how do we deal with bad throws? If everyone throws badly, whether it's during practice or during a tournament, what do we actually do when we have a bad throw or even a good throw? What I try and do when I have a bad throw is, the first thing I try and do is just park it, say, right, that happened. I can't do anything about it now. Disc golf has no memory, has no history. It's in the past. Let's worry about the next shot. I don't worry if I've thrown it badly. I don't scream at the sky. What I also try and do pretty much straight away is diagnose what I did wrong. Was it bad footing? Did I slip? Did the disc slip out of my hand? Was my grip wrong? Nose release wrong? Did I misread the wind? Did I have the wrong disc? Did it land incorrectly? Did it skip too much and went OB? So I don't worry about a bad throw. Well, everybody worries about a bad throw, but I don't worry about it too much. But I try and triage the throw, and I try and sort of understand what went wrong, so I'm ready to fix it on the very next shot. So if you have a bad throw, try not to worry about it, especially if you're a beginner. It's very hard. I know what I was like as a beginner. I was a total mess. I couldn't understand why I couldn't play. Yeah, and just triage your bad throws, triage your good throws. Every throw is a data point. You learn something about your discs, which goes back to the very first point I discussed with every throw. So every throw is a data point. Don't worry about the bad ones. We all do it. Just try and learn from them. Well, thank you for watching my little video. I really just threw together on the spur of the moment. I'd like to shout out Marcus, who's a very young disc golfer who hasn't been playing that long. He's part of the Melbourne Disc Golf Club. I played the social day with him maybe 2 weeks ago at Ruffy Lake, and he kind of inspired this video by asking all sorts of questions about, how do you do this upshot and land it flat on this particular hole 6 at Ruffy, and we talked about gaps on hole 7 at Ruffy and things like that. So yeah, so it ended up being quite an enjoyable round, just sort of chatting disc golf strategies with a 10-year-old kid who is an absolute delight and a joy to play with. And he's also going to become the best player in Australia if he sticks with it. You heard it here first. So thanks, Marcus. That was fun to do. And yeah, also if you're a beginner and you're trying to build a bag and you don't know what to do, one thing I forgot to say is try and get into a store or a shop and feel these discs. Don't order them online if you don't know what the discs feel like. So yeah, get into a shop like maybe Bespoke Disc Golf in Melbourne and fondle the discs. Make sure a disc feels good in your hand, because there's nothing worse than a disc that doesn't feel right. So thank you, and I'll see you next time.